This U.S. and Canada lesson will cover Minnesota Standards 83361 and 83231. By the end of this unit, you should be able to say that I can show how the physical characteristics of the U.S. and Canada affect settlement patterns of human population, and I can use geographic tools to explain the distribution of physical and human characteristics of places. So basically, we're going to use maps to look at physical environmental features to figure out why people live where they do. So what physical environmental features are we talking about? Today, we'll be talking about waterways, landforms, climate, and resources. First, let's talk about waterways. To understand why waterways are important when determining where people live, we need to know what they are. Waterways are routes along rivers, lakes, or oceans that are used to get from one place to another. Before we talk about waterways in the US and Canada, let's talk about the significance of waterways in general. To do that, we need to go way back in time, even before cell phones were invented, to about the 4th century BC, to one of the very first civilizations called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia became one of the first civilizations because of its waterways. As you can see, it's located in present-day Iraq near Baghdad, and it's between two major rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Both of these rivers empty themselves in the Persian Gulf. The water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers made this land very fertile. Fertile means having nutrients capable of growing a large amount of plants. And so because the land was so fertile, and historians are so clever when they come up with names for places, they called this area the Fertile Crescent. The land in Mesopotamia was so fertile, it then allowed people there to grow crops. The people were able to grow enough crops to feed everyone and have extras, and that allowed them then to raise animals. Living so close to two waterways also gave the Mesopotamians some other advantages. One advantage is transportation. It's much easier to put people or goods on a boat and send them down the river than it is to carry it across the desert. Another advantage is exploration. It's a lot more fun and a lot less work to find new places and new neighbors on a boat. The last advantage is having trade routes. The people could transport their goods, and now they explored and found new neighbors, and they could trade their goods to other people. Here's a map of all the things our friends in Mesopotamia traded with other places. So now I bet you're wondering, how does this apply to the US and Canada? First, let's take a look at the different waterways that we have in the United States and Canada. We have two oceans. We have the Pacific Ocean on the west. We have the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast. We have the Great Lakes. We have the Gulf of Mexico. We have the Hudson Bay. And look at all of these rivers all over the United States and Canada. Now that you know where the major waterways are, let's take a look at the major cities in the US and Canada. Can you see how they're all located, or most of them anyway, are located near major waterways? Let's look at a few examples. The first waterways we'll look at are ports. You can see that on the west coast in LA and San Diego, and in the Gulf of Mexico we have New Orleans, and on the east coast we have New York and Boston, that these are major trading centers. Goods go in and out of the United States at these places. And a long, long time ago, your grandparents may have come in through one of these major immigration centers. Now let's take a look at the cities that are underlined. These areas are in very fertile places in the US and Canada. Once the farmers figured out how to grow enough crops for themselves, for their livestock, and then they had extras, they could send them onto the rivers to get them out to the Great Lakes or to the ports in order to trade with other countries or to send them to other places in the United States. Waterways are also important for manufacturing in the United States and Canada. You can see on this map that I have the Great Lakes area circled. This is a very important manufacturing area in the US and Canada. The city of Detroit is a good example of this. They are known for their car manufacturing. Once the cars are built, the Great Lakes gives them easy access to trade routes to sell their cars around the world. So as a review, waterways are very important when explaining where people live in the United States because it allows people to farm, it allows for manufacturing, and it also allows us to transport and trade our goods. Okay, so your brain now is probably pretty overloaded with waterways. So let's move on to the next thing, landforms. Landforms are any natural feature on the surface of the earth. Landforms can also help us explain why people live where they do in the US and Canada. Let's find out where people live in the US and Canada. This is a population density map. The areas that are shaded darker red or orange are where more people live. The areas that aren't shaded have hardly any people living there. When we learned about waterways, that helped explain why people live where they do. Landforms can help us explain why people don't live in certain areas. Let's compare this population density map with a physical map of the United States and Canada, and let's see if you can figure out why. Did you figure it out? You got it, it's the Rocky Mountains. It's difficult to grow crops in the mountains, and a lot of times the mountains have very cold climates and steep elevations, which make it difficult for people to live in. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't mention the other mountain range in the United States. And you're right, we do have another mountain range in the United States and Canada. It's called the Appalachian Mountains. However, this doesn't affect population as much because these mountains are not nearly as tall and the climate is not as severe. And speaking of climate, that's actually another environmental feature that can help us explain why people live where they do in the United States and Canada. The definition of climate is the average weather conditions of a region over the course of a year. Let's take another look at our population density map to figure out where people live and where they don't. Now let's compare that to a climate map of North America. You see all that purple area in Canada? Remember that no one lives there? That's because the climate is very, very cold. Do you see that really light brown or tan area with the speckled things on it? Remember when we talked about the Rocky Mountains? That's it. The climate is not there suitable for living either. You see those areas that are shaded yellow in the orangish yellow? That's also the desert, so it's too hot to live there. Okay, now take a look again at where people live in the United States and Canada. Now take a look at the climate map, and you'll see that where most of the people live in the United States and Canada, the climates are either warm or they're very moderate, so it makes it comfortable for people to live there. Now finally, we're going to take a look at natural resources and how they affect where people live and don't live in the United States and Canada. Natural resources are naturally occurring materials that can be used for other things, such as land, forest, mineral deposits, and water. This is a map of the oil reserves in the United States and Canada. You can see two things with this. Number one, you can see that a lot of the reserves are where no one lives, and that's probably because they are too expensive to get at because they're in the mountains or places that's very dangerous to work. The other thing is that you can see where there's lots of population there because it's a climate that's easy to live in, and they can build oil refineries in these places, and so lots of people can get their jobs there. This map shows the coal reserves in the United States, and again you can see that a lot of the coal is located near the mountains. This is a map of forests in the United States and Canada. There are places, especially in the Pacific Northwest, that rely on cutting down trees as part of their economy. In fact, for a long time, people in Minnesota made a lot of money cutting down trees and then sending them down the rivers to send to other places. So there you have it. The next time someone asks you to explain why the physical and environmental features of the US and Canada determine where people live and settle, you know why. It's the waterways, it's the landforms, it's the climate, and it's the natural resources.